Bang! I'm live. I am live. A little bit late. A little bit late. Sorry about that. All kinds of things happened all at once, right at the end of of my preparation. But look, I think this is super important. We want to sort out what is going on with the Fuentes and Piers Morgan debate, which was not a debate. I don't want to so much focus on that as I want to point out the commentators and what they're doing. So you have a number of commentators, right? Uh, all kinds. And I'm not trying to go through them all or anything crazy, right? I'm not going to go through everybody on the internet or anything nutty. But I picked a few that I think will say have some interesting framing for talking about this. And then what I want to do is highlight issues with that framing. So, what is really going on when we're doing a commentary on this discussion? We're trying to understand the discussion. It's an act of sense making for the audience and possibly for the commentator themselves, right? So, a lot of the problem we have is that people mimic things without realizing it. This is the everybody thinks everything's rational and intentional, and it's not. A lot of things you just do without even understanding what you're doing. A lot of people do things and they don't notice that they did them at all. This happens all the time. Okay. It's not a big deal. But there's a lot of popular frames, and some of these people are using them for better or for worse, usually for worse. There's the wrestling frame. That was academic agent, right? Carl Benjamin has been infected by college, and so he's using Baudrillard. Some people are using like game theory. Some people are just using straight up psychology. And of course, they're all bad at it, but that's a different problem. Some people are casting this as a debate. So that this is a debate and here's who won. This is all nonsense, right? Some people are using post war consensus, right? They're throwing this into these frames. The problem with that is that many people of sufficient talent can do that for anything and for any frame. In other words, uh, Carl Benjamin could switch frames and go to, let's understand this in terms of game theory. And that's a lot of what is happening. And look, that's not to say that using metaphors and analogies isn't helpful and useful, but what is being accomplished? Like, what are these commentators talking about this interview actually trying to accomplish? What are they selling and is it useful? And I can give you a very coherent, reasonable, rational, logical way to think about the interview, which is a proper name for what's going on, right? But if it doesn't lead to action, am I doing the most good? If it doesn't lead to something you can participate with actively, is what I'm doing a good thing? And you don't want it to be a good thing. You want it to be the best thing, right, in the situation. Now, these are just two guys talking, so it's sort of hard to determine, well, what could be the best sort of outcomes, right? And sure, you can argue that, calming people down about something they're confused about, because they don't have a good understanding of what happened, or they don't know how they should view something, um, is a good thing, right? But it's not better than giving them a way to participate in the world. If you want to radicalize somebody, you don't tell them radical things. You don't give them, crazy ideas. You don't go out there and say, Heil Hitler. You don't normalize the behaviors that we'll say are negative. That's not what you do. Uh, if you want to radicalize somebody, what you do is you give them no way out of a situation while ignoring their concerns. And one way to do that is by talking about things in a frame that's unhelpful. So you say, "Oh, I agree. Nick has a point. Now let me be abundantly clear about this. Nick Fuentes has many excellent points. Many. Okay. I haven't heard anybody come up with anything that he said that is like overtly incorrect. Right now, he's done a few opinions. We can argue about whether or not his opinions are done for, we'll say, entertainment purposes, or uh, if those, in which case they're clips taken out of context, or if those represent, we'll say, a desire on his part to see a certain mode of participation in the world. Right? It looks to me like mostly he's an entertainer, and good for him. I tend to stray away from entertainment as much as I can, although you should be entertained, right? But my primary mode is not to entertain you or shock you, right? Or entertain you through shock, right? Those are all different things. The problem is when you don't address someone's concerns, eventually somebody will find a better frame and the battle for audience and relevance will begin anew. In other words, when you find out that James Lindsay's a raving lunatic and his frame doesn't work, you just follow somebody who isn't James Lindsay, but you're still following somebody else. And that's a problem. All these commentators are doing is forcing people to follow somebody else instead of them. And that causes them to fight for the audience or relevance all over again. And like, I don't mind. I mean, some of these people have stable audiences. I don't think anybody that listens to Carl Benjamin is going to go anywhere. Um, but eventually their frame's going to break, right? That analogy is not going to work. They're going to run out of ways to talk about the world that people find compelling. And you're seeing this all over right now, right? You're seeing people fighting for influence in a chaotic world. And these people are trying to make sense or giving you a way to make sense out of things that quite honestly can't be made sense out of, or at least not to you, or at least not the way they're going about. And so when you don't understand what it is you're up to or what it is other people are up to, it's very easy for you to get lost in this interaction where what you're doing is just giving people crazy analogies and telling them stuff and then moving on. And then they're moving on too. And that's the churn that everybody talks about. It's not the only source of churn, but it's a big source of churn. And part of the trick is that, you know, you can draw analogies between all kinds of things, but that doesn't mean they're useful analogies. And there is a skill to drawing analogies. I understand that, right? And people that have that skill might be rare or relatively rare. But that doesn't mean just because they have the skill that they're good at it, because just because you have a skill at something doesn't mean you're actually good at it. There's a hierarchy within the skill set. Some people are better at building houses than others. Whatever better may mean, faster, better quality, whatever, right? It's the same with analogies. Some people are really good at drawing analogies, some people are really bad at drawing analogies. But many people can't draw analogies at all. They can understand analogies when they hear them, but they can't come up with them on their own. This is a very common phenomenon, by the way. So once you understand that, it should help you to understand what's going on here. Basically, in order for an analogy to be useful, it has to meet some standard of final cause. There are other standards too, but it has to meet some standard final cause. It has to have some purpose to it, right? It has to have some explanatory power outside of the analogy itself. And then you can, make it useful, right? If your analogy is about wrestling to describe an interview, that is a poor analogy. That's academic agent's thing. He used this whole thing called ring psychology. And I was like, well, I'm not familiar with this term. What is he's talking about the wrestling ring. And I was just like, I can't deal with this. I can't deal with it. Right. And it's a poor analogy because you aren't a wrestler. You don't have a way to win that match, and there's nothing you participate in. So he's basically telling you you're an audience member, and these two are going to do whatever they're going to do. And here's their roles: one's a heel and one's a baby face. Okay, so what? And again, the fact that you can cast the interview as a wrestling match is not impressive to me. Like, I don't care. Like, so what? I could cast the interview as a chess match too. Who cares? Like, what, you could cast it as a game theoretical battle over influence. Okay. But what difference does that make? And that's really the issue that I'm trying to highlight. These people are not making a difference. And originally, I was going to do this video as like a recorded video, and then I said, no, everybody else is doing recorded videos, and it's a lot of work to do this as a recorded video. Instead, I got a bunch of clips up from not video clips, but clips up from notes and summaries and stuff that I have done. Um, I just want to take a moment to kind of switch back and give you a tell or a hint for bad behavior, right? Notice what is missing. These people are talking about this interview, and they're missing some of the key elements in the interview that we used to have. In the not too distant past, we would have called what Piers Morgan was doing in the beginning of the interview an ad hominem attack and left it at that. This isn't a logical argument. It's not a wrestling match. He didn't make any Pierce didn't make any logical arguments that I'm aware of in this conversation. What he did was he just kept attacking Fuentes with hints and allegations, and I haven't heard anybody point that out. Like, this is a reputation destruction game. And instead, people are ignoring the phrase ad hominem attack for whatever reason and using very complicated ways of fitting the interview into their new frame. Why? I don't know. It's Baudrillard. It's reality and hyper reality. Wait, that's a towel for a bad frame. Okay. Reality already encompasses everything in the definition of the term. There isn't any such possibility, not thing, but possibility of a hyper reality without destroying the term reality. And if you destroy the term reality, hyper reality is also destroyed because it's just a modified version of reality. Okay. Baudrillard is an idiot. Okay. I'm sorry. Baudrillard just reinvented nominalism with a slightly different twist to it. That's all that he did. You can pull it up in the AI and ask the AI too. The AI will tell you the same thing, at least sometimes. So they're also not talking about indictment by implication, right? Oh, you know who else had a mustache? Right. They're not doing that. That happened in that interview right in the beginning, right? Why are we talking about those things? We used to, like last week. What happened to these terms and these ways of understanding things, right? And how about holding people up to an unspoken standard? Because that happened too. People aren't mentioning these things. These used to be the strong go to points. Why has the landscape shifted in terms of what you're pointing out as bad behavior in an interview? Well, isn't that an interesting question? What has changed? I think that's a worthy question. I think it's a really worthy question. Handsome, and it's good to see you. An interview I haven't seen. The interview is terrible. It's terrible. I will explain some of it later. Haven't read Baudrillard either. Have I missed out? No, don't read Baudrillard. The AI nicely led me to conclusions about Baudrillard that were right up what I had expected all along, which is he's just recapitulating nominalism. Who cares? Not very interesting. And the idea that there's a hyper reality is just, even if that were true, it's so useless, right? So I'm going to give you a better way to understand what's going on here. Okay. It's not really, say, the goal of this. The goal of this is to point out we got all these commentators. Why? They don't agree. It's not like the commentaries are pointing out things like Piers relied on ad hominem attacks. Piers did guilt by implication. You know, Piers was holding him up to a standard without any justification for that standard or even a definition of it. Like, why can't we focus on that? Those are all bad behavior things that journalists shouldn't be doing. And I think part of the problem is that people don't really understand what journalism is, and they don't themselves understand standards. Your happy little commentators, as much as I love Carl Benjamin, they don't have standards either. That's why they don't recognize that the standards aren't there or are being broken. They don't. Now they have implicit standards that because everybody has that. This is the least interesting fact in the history of the universe, we'll say. But they don't have stated standards. Carl Benjamin can't tell you what his standards are because he doesn't have them. I've heard him try to argue his standards. He can't. He can't do it. And that's too bad. I'd love to, help him out. But, you know, and it's worth knowing what's going on. So Hanselman Pierce is not a nice man as far as I've seen, and that is very little. Yeah, and that's the thing. So what business is he in? Okay, first of all, he's not a good journalist, whether he has the title of journalist or not. And this is one of the things that's very important, is that just because somebody got to a place doesn't mean they're good at being in that place. Sorry. That's just the way the world happens to behave. There's nothing I can do about that. Piers is not in the same socioeconomic class. I hate talking about it like that because I don't think that's accurate enough, but it'll have to do, as Fuentes. And so let me just point something out. Because Piers has money, when he goes somewhere and there are people of different races, the likelihood that they also have money is like really, 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 really high, right? Money is a great filter for a bunch of things. Now, let's just imagine that you work at a large bank and you're fairly high up in the bank, right? I suppose you're at JP Morgan Chase or something, you report to Jamie Dimon or something, which if you do that, you should kill yourself instead, but whatever. Let's suppose you do. The peers that you have in your position of any race are more like you and see the world more like you than they see the world of people from the same race, but a different socioeconomic class. And that's a lot of what's going on here. So when you explain or try to explain to people why Piers is saying what he's saying, or you inject into him what Piers must know, Piers Morgan does not see the world the way you and I do. Period. End of statement. Because he doesn't live in that world. He lives in the luxury world of wealth. That world has a different perspective because is a different set of filters. It's a different bubble. And you can come back and you can say, look, there's the numbers. Right? I will give you the actual numbers of how many times giving people the numbers changes their mind. It's zero. No numbers explain this. Okay, I'm sorry, but it's not like in the US or even in Europe, the ratios of, we'll say, the correlation between bad behavior and race have changed. They haven't. Like almost at all. So those numbers have been that way in some cases for 100 years. So if the numbers meant anything to anybody and changed anybody's mind, that would have happened already. That hasn't happened already. Therefore, that doesn't work. It's really not that hard. All these other people talking about logic, that's logic. This is not hard. And they can't do that logic for whatever reason. Don't listen to them about logic. They're lost. They're lost. And that's the problem. And that's the problem. So, sure, Anselman, he was extremely intolerant of those people who didn't want to submit to a medical experiment. In his view, it wasn't a medical experiment because in his world, experts are correct and they matter. And that's how things are done. In my world, I tell people pretty clearly, don't listen to experts because how do you know if they're expert if you're not also an expert? Don't listen to experts. Listen to leaders. Leaders take responsibility. Experts have no responsibility whatsoever. It doesn't mean there's not consequences when they're wrong or when they're caught lying about being experts or any of that. But that's not the same as taking responsibility. You can't swap those two things. Okay. Piers is not a journalist because he doesn't take responsibility for good journalism practices. He doesn't even know what they are. He is technically unprincipled. He's not the only one. All these commentators that I have seen on this are also unprincipled people. They don't understand the principles behind that conversation at all. And you can say, well, there's Piers doing the ad hominem attacks. That would be a great way to talk about it, by the way, right? As I pointed out earlier. Yes, I wonder why. I wonder why a guy whose job is reputation would go after somebody else's reputation. It's almost as if people in the reputation business, and journalism isn't only that. That's why he's not a good journalist, because he's focused on reputation, which is not good journalism, right? That's the rag stuff, right? The rag magazine garbage, right? Why would he go after that? Well, his highest value is reputation. So if he wants to ruin somebody, right, or point out something bad about somebody, he's not going to use scientific facts. He's not a scientist. Of course, he's not going to. Right? I mean, he might get some as fodder to help it use, but he's going to go after your reputation. Of course, that's the highest value in his bubble. In his perspective, from on high, the most important thing is reputation. Now, how it got that way, it's not that way for everybody in his socioeconomic class, right? But whatever, that's what he does. Of course, he's going to attack the reputation. Of course, he isn't going to deal logically with anything. He's not good at logic. Piers Morgan isn't good at logic. Expecting him to put forth a logical argument is ridiculous. And that's not to say he can't deploy logic occasionally in certain circumstances, but he's not going to have a logical debate with somebody. He's not good at it. It's also not something he values. He values reputation. That's the way to understand this. So you have two people from two different perspectives, vastly different perspectives, battling for reputation. That's what that conversation was. It was other things too. I get that. But that's what was fundamentally going on. I don't think Nick at any point thought that he was going to be able to sway any of the people watching Piers Morgan. I don't think he is, confused about that. I think commentators are confused about that for sure. Because you'll notice what all these commentators have in common. They're telling you how somebody else is thinking, somebody that they don't even know and haven't met in most cases. You haven't even met these guys. You haven't hung out with them, unlike had meals with either of them. Why do you think you know anything about them? Maybe you've appeared with them and you've had talks with them or whatever. Well, it doesn't mean you know somebody, especially not in a professional setting. Meet somebody in a professional setting, usually the overlap between your professional life and your real life is fairly small, actually. Piers is a professional reputation person. That's what he does. And maybe he's trying to destroy everybody else's reputation to make his own greater or something. I don't know. I don't know Piers. I'm not going to get into the psychology of it. I'm going to tell you, though, there's lots of possibilities as to why he's doing what he's doing. He could have been put up to it by somebody else. I don't freaking know. It could just be that the BBC is so corrupt and the British institutions of journalism are so corrupt, and there's just corruption everywhere there, because that's also true, by the way. So I don't know if that's what's motivating or causing Piers to be that way. If we'll say the highest ideal of journalism in his country is the BBC, and it's a nightmare, and it's getting exposed for doing just horrific things that are completely unprincipled, because it appears that a lot of the people over there in the UK are incapable of being principled for whatever reason. It could be that causes you, when you're in that system or around that ideal, to also be corrupt. It could be. There's lots of possibilities. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to make the mistake of these commentators and tell you what's going through Piers's mind or Nick's mind. I'm not going to tell you that. Okay? I might give you some possibilities. I might say, hey, I don't think this is true about Nick, or I don't think this is true about Piers. Piers does not live in the same world as you and I. expecting him to have the same set of facts or believe the same information is ridiculous. That's an error on your part. Of course he doesn't. Of course he doesn't feel fear when he goes over the house of his black friends. I, on the other hand, might feel that way. It sort of depends which neighborhood I'm in. Down the street, no problem at all. My street's wonderful, and like we got all kinds of races on this street. This is a very mixed socioeconomic street that I live on, right? But if I'm in certain parts in Columbia, South Carolina, I'm locking my windows and rolling up my windows and locking my doors because there's some sketchy stuff going on and people get shot. Like that's a reality. In Pierce's world, no one gets shot in a neighborhood. Like that doesn't happen to him. It's not something he reads about or hears about. And when an event that does happen, it's not framed that way because it's not gang violence. Even if it's related to like drug gangs or something, it's not gang violence. It's a vendetta from one wealthy person to another or something, right? That's they reframe it. And fair enough. And that's what these commentators are doing. They're just not using useful frames. And the thing is, why is everybody tied up with this conversation between Piers and Nick? Like, what is happening? But let me ask you a question. What happens in a democracy when someone becomes popular? Well, if you think you're in a democracy, whether you are or not, it's irrelevant. If you think you are, if you're acting as if you are, if a bunch of commentators who know nothing about what they're talking about keep saying the word democracy over and over and over again, even though there's very few democracies and they don't live in one and I don't live in one. I live in a republic, thank you very much. Then the fear is that this person on the screen is going to transition from whatever popularity contest they're winning into a position of political so-called power. Whether or not that actually exists is that's a different live stream. What happens in a democracy when someone becomes popular? That's what happens. Actors might become president. Comedians might get elected to to office. Online influencers might get appointments to important positions or to gather support for a candidate that's running for an office. Who knows what might occur? All those things have happened, by the way, in the US. So just to let you know, I don't really deal well with hypotheticals because I don't need to. Dealing with pure hypotheticals, you're not dealing with the real world. What are we talking about? I'm a pragmatist. Now, is this good? Let's recognize one thing. Democracy is an equality doctrine. And that's what it's based on. And it's been made worse through suffrage, letting pretty much anybody vote instead of having nice filters in place for who can vote. And the idea was already debunked as a good idea by the ancient Greeks. They knew better through experience why democracy is bad, right? You don't want the vast majority of your crew members trying to navigate your ship because they don't know how. You don't want these things to happen. This is not helpful. So let's just go over some of these guys. I think I'll start with Connor Tomlinson, who I don't even like a little bit. What a crazy person this guy is. Why young men think Nick Fuentes destroyed Piers Morgan, right? And so he's saying, look, you can sense Piers Morgan's frustration and you can sense Nick's confidence. And that's usually a sign that people have nothing to lose. If I think I'm not getting through to the person I'm talking to, I will get frustrated. But it's not like I've lost anything because I've tried to talk to them and it hasn't worked. That's fine. I'm not losing anything. Nick has nothing to lose because his audience isn't going anywhere because he's talking to an out of touch person. And now you can sit there and you can say, you know what, Mark, this is just the boomer versus the millennial sort of thing, or whatever the heck it is. No, it's not. Okay. This is easy to prove, by the way. So if you say, all right, look, Piers Morgan, because of his age, is stuck in the results of the post-war consensus or something, which is one thing that Carl Benjamin mentioned. And the problem with that thesis is that there are people of much younger ages that agree with Piers. And the thing they have in common is socioeconomic class, because that's the perspective and that's the bubble. They're not out there reading philosophy and worrying about, you know, what 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 forces and are driving a particular generation, or whatever, because the generation's not important, right? The actions are important. Doesn't matter what age they are that people are doing them at. It matters that these actions don't happen. So they're not worrying about that. They're just going to take the expert's word for it because that's what they have access to. And besides, there's cake to be eaten. And they have that option, and I don't. I had to work for a living. Fundamentally different. I can't worry about my reputation in the way that Piers does because I had to work for a living. It's not that hard, right? Fuentes has a solid base. They've already tried to suppress him 6 ways to Sunday. He's got nothing to lose. Confidence on both sides to some extent. Piers is frustrated because he thinks that to some extent he's going to be able to change the mind of his interlocutor and show him what he sees. But that's never going to happen because Piers can't even define what he sees. He doesn't know what he sees. He just knows these things are good and these things are bad. And that is the advantage of the myth of World War II, is that you can very easily go through this thing and say, aha, here are the good things, here are the bad things. I don't need to engage with fairy tales. I don't need to engage with worrying about philosophical arguments for and against. I don't need that, right? Now, unfortunately, that's not the right way to think about the myth of World War II. And also, that's not what's going on, right? What's going on is people who don't want to think about these things and grow up in a certain class are already in the myth of World War II, and so are the rest of us. Nick thinks he has an upper hand because he's got evidence that the myth of World War II is false in important ways. And that's also true, right? Now, unfortunately, because a myth is a myth, everybody's understanding of a myth is a little bit different. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the result of how myths work. And a good myth will give people a nice, reasonable understanding, and a bad myth will not. And Connor in particular goes into, why older people hate Fuentes, right? And he says it's a threat to their moral order. And Carl Benjamin, I think, said something similar. I don't know what a moral order is or how you would threaten a moral order, or really any kind of order. There are threats to order. That's called anarchy, right? Criminality. Those are threats to order. There's other threats to order, but those are a few. I don't know what a moral order is, so I don't know how he can be a threat to that. I don't know what the quote post-war liberal order is. I don't think there's a reasonable definition for any of these things. I think people are kind of insane when they talk this way. Tomlinson thinks, oh, it's the power of hyperbole and comedy. What are you talking about? Obviously, hyperbole has a quote power and ability, right? It has its place, we'll say. And the fact that it has its place is really not terribly interesting. I don't know how that plays into the conversation. The fact that Fuentes is an entertainer who uses the tools of entertainment to entertain his audience while making very important points, much like many of the comedians of the past, 40 years have done, is really not all that interesting to me. I mean, it's evidently true, but I don't think that's a power. I don't even find it, particularly compelling. Everything being a joke. It's a yoke. This isn't working out, right? It's denigrating the ability for people to engage in these things and do anything at all about them. And it's bizarre to me to put things into frames like that. And it's easy to notice a bunch of things, right? You can notice of the failure of the post-war moral order. You can notice the sexual revolution was a problem, right? You can notice the hypocrisy of the media and the political elite. That's always been true. The political elite, right? The ruling classes have always had an air of hypocrisy about them. That's an incorrect term to use. It's not actually hypocrisy. Sometimes it is, but almost always it's not. It's just rules are there to be broken to some extent. It's the exception that proves the rule. Who gets to break the rule and why? Well, that's actually very important. And that's not hypocrisy. And just because you don't follow the standard you set for somebody else doesn't mean anything. You set a child's bedtime at 8 p.m. and you don't go to bed at 8 p.m. You're not a hypocrite. Like, I'm sorry. That's not how that works. I know that might be people's understanding. These people are nitwits. Okay? They don't have the mental capacity to understand the nuance behind something like hypocrisy. And fair enough, most people are stupid. Also, don't listen to stupid people. There's no reason to. There's no call to listen to stupid people. Don't do it. This idea of a rise of collective identity among white men, look, everybody always has a collective identity, and that collective identity is very much based on your class. That's what it's based on. Where and how you grew up. And maybe you don't fit in and you can hop classes or whatever, because that happens. But there's no collective identity difference between any groups. And it's interesting here. So I had, and this is one good way to use the AI. I had the AI tell me ambiguous or unclear terms, and it picks post-war liberal order. Yeah. Woke. Yeah. Blank slate. Yeah. These are undefined terms for sure. Zoomer, boomer, ethno state. Yeah. I don't know what the heck an ethno state is or why you would use the term state at all. Do you mean nation? Because nation actually encompasses at least some of the ideas of an ethno state, but it's a way better term, and it's older. It's been in use for a lot longer. So, like, I don't know what these people are doing. Like, I don't understand. Academic Agent, though, is my favorite. Academic Agent went into this ring psychology nonsense. I was like, wait, what? He said Piers Morgan, didn't appear to have an ambush strategy in the beginning. Well, if you listen to the beginning conversation, yes, he did. Like, that was 100% clear. I don't know what Academic Age is talking about. I feel bad if anybody took any of his courses. I'm like, no, don't only get your money back, but like sue for trauma. Like, this guy is a clown. Rhetoric? He doesn't understand rhetoric. So yeah, I mean, why is ring psychology? This interview is a wrestling match, and look, the AI said it was an interview too, not just me, right? And it's weird too because a lot of times these people get things right. Academic Agent got the disparity of crime statistics correct, and the disparity of, we'll say, Piers' vision of how race is handled at his layer of society versus Nick's. He got that completely correct. But pretty much everything else is like, what are you talking about? Why would you talk this way? And a lot of people misunderstand Piers' strategy here. They make these things very complicated. It's ridiculously simple, guys. Okay, when Piers Morgan is doing a personal attack against Fuentes, he's using the power of reputation, which is the thing he values most, to manipulate the situation. And one method of doing that is don't speak to your audience, speak to their audience. So everybody knows incels are bad, and incel is this weird made up term that relates to some kind of collective identity. If you want to put it in this frame, which I don't recommend you do, but this is what people are doing to me, right? That's fine. Then it makes sense to use that as Piers Morgan against him. Piers does some research, finds out, the equivalent of a horrible person in Zoomerland or Millennial Land or whatever land he thinks he's trying to reach is incel. So I'm going to point out the hypocrisy, right, of him being an incel to him, as though hypocrisy has some hold over Nick Fuentes, which of course it doesn't, and as though incel is the only way to look at the situation. And Nick is not an incel because it's not involuntary, at least according to him. Whether that's true or not, I do not know the mind of Nick Fuentes. I am not going to pretend that I do. But of course, that's going to backfire spectacularly because Piers doesn't understand the term, how it's deployed, why it's important. And so he's not going to make any progress. The other reason you don't make any progress is because of your audience. And my animation video on the doc and how this works is coming out next week. It's in editing. It's almost done. That will be out. You're going to love it. You better watch it. It's fantastic. I think the way these people sort of link things together is important. So Academic Agent is telling you how and why Piers Morgan and what he's thinking when he links certain things together. And I don't think that any of that is right. Again, I don't think Academic Agent understands the mind of Piers Morgan any better than Piers Morgan, which is to say neither of them understand the mind of Piers Morgan at all. And fair enough. I know, Jordan Peterson, you don't know what you're up to. Yeah, I think that's probably correct. When we think about what is linked and what is not linked, we have to understand that a lot of things are linked whether we like them to be or not. Certain things come together, right? You can't jump from a 30-story building and not get damaged unless you're a stuntman landing on a soft spot, right? Like that's just not an option. But people, especially these commentators, are trying to carve up the world and put things together in a random order that doesn't actually match anything important or interesting or good. And because of that, it's just a bunch of confusion all the way down. And they're contributing to this confusion. So Warren Smith, and I don't like Warren Smith even a little bit. And it's not that he says a lot of wrong things, but man, when he's wrong, he's wrong. He went into Piers Morgan's approach backfired because he played to win. What are you talking about? This is not a game. You can't play to win. What would the prize be for winning, and what would winning look like in an interview? It doesn't make any sense, dude. Like, what are you talking about? The only way to lose is to play to win. These are just flat out contradictions that can't be true ever. Irrespective of all of the circumstances, it's a principle. These people aren't principled. These commentators, they have no idea what they're doing. And, he made another thing. Fuentes wanted to be challenged, but only by his own arguments. It's like he wanted Piers to meet him on his own terms. Fuentes was there and he was going to get challenged, and he knew that. He just knows, again, they're both pretty confident that they have nothing to lose. That's clear. Fuentes knows that Piers doesn't have an argument against him. He doesn't care what argument Piers uses. Piers is not a debater. Piers is not a logical person. Piers is not somebody who has facts and figures ready at hand. Piers is not going to win any kind of argument, discussion, or debate with anyone ever, because Piers doesn't have those skills and never did, and doesn't use them, and doesn't value them, and doesn't rely on them. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, even if you're putting this as a game, you better define what game you're playing. Piers is playing the game of reputation. That is his whole system. He doesn't have anything other than that. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not. I mean, it makes him a, what is it, yellow journalist or whatever, or, you know, some kind of lower class, lower tier gossip columnist. Maybe. I don't know. I don't care. I know what he ain't, and he ain't no logistician. Okay. That was never on the table. That's why Fuentes went in. Fuentes is like, my audience likes logical arguments. Even if they're incorrect, by the way. This is what all these commentators are doing. They're giving you a logical way to understand something that's completely incorrect. How do I know that, Mark? Because they're all different. They can't all be right. They contradict each other in many cases. They can't all be right. The conclusions are different. Like, these conclusions don't have any overlap, really. Right? I mean, the idea that Piers Morgan's strategy was predictable and ineffective. Yeah. Again, Fuentes knew he couldn't lose because Piers is predictable. Okay, I kind of agree. But also, who cares? Who cares? Why is this interesting? The important part is not to understand these clowns. Even Carl Benjamin, I love Carl Benjamin, but my goodness, man, he went to school and like now he's got dumb disease or something. Like Baudrillard, really? We got to be able to do better. I mean, listen to the way these people talk, right? One of the things I noticed is that these people think things like conservatism is like a club that you're either let into or kicked out of somehow. But that's not the right way to think about conservatism. Conservatism is an observation of a set of behaviors. That's how you know somebody's conservative. There's no authority mediating who's a conservative and who's not a conservative, right? And the thing is, if somebody thinks that, I'll just let you know right now, they're a leftist or a moderate, right? Moderates sort of rely on that. Leftists don't have any principles or any way to deal with boundaries. Moderates will hem and haw about where the boundaries should be. Conservatives just draw the line and deal with the consequences because they know the lines are not going to be right, but you got to draw a line and they're going to draw that line and stick by it because it's hard to know, is the unfairness due to the fact that you have to have a line and it's always going to be at least that unfair? Is this the least unfair this line can be drawn? Because that's a thing in the world. Everybody who doesn't think that's a thing in the world is an idealist and a perfectionist. And they're either a moderate or a leftist because conservatives don't think. I know conservatives. They're not coming online to talk to you ever. They're not coming online to talk to me either. That's not going to happen. They don't believe that even if rhetoric moves the world, which they generally don't believe, they might believe rhetoric moves other conservatives. Right. In other words, the conservative will move their line, but at least they draw lines. They don't believe it's going to be effective on a leftist because leftists don't draw boundaries on anything ever. They'll tell you they believe in boundaries, but you have to draw any boundary on anything. They will be unable to do so. That's a leftist. It's not two groups, guys. It's three. One of them is absent from online. Not that they're not online. It's that they're not going to start a YouTube channel. The people starting YouTube channels are former leftists. They were leftists yesterday. That should have been a hint to you as to what was going on. If they were leftist yesterday and suddenly they've been branded a conservative, that means someone's stuck in binary thinking. And they're like, well, if you're not identifying as a leftist, you must be identifying as a conservative. No, because there's more than two buckets. Sorry, even voting. If you ask the group to self-sort in the United States, what do you get? You get a relatively small number of registered Democrats, a relatively small number of registered Republicans, and the overwhelming number of registrations are called independent. So the people will sort themselves into three groups reliably without any help. Why are you sorting them into two? If your commentator is thinking about left and right, they're stuck in binary thinking. Don't listen to anything they say. All of their conclusions will only be right by accident and temporarily because things shift and binary systems don't shift. They're unbelievably symmetrical. And the world is not symmetrical. That would be terrible. But you listen to how they talk about conservatism. This person's going to get kicked out of the conservatism. What are you talking about? No. You think conservatives are making YouTube channels trying to convince you of something? To the extent that they are, they're the most boring YouTube channels of all time because they will not use hyperbole. They will not use examples. They will just tell you how things are in the blandest, most boring fashion possible. And that's the problem. That's the problem. And the grouping of conservative is an observation. It's just there for you to look at. You can't manipulate it. It's not to say that people don't stop being conservative, right? The fact that, someone grows up in a conservative family, and then they turn lefty doesn't mean anything. That's called genetic variation or something. Like, who cares? Like, the nurture versus nature argument is been long solved. It's both, dummy, and other things. I don't know what to tell you, right? So whenever you say, "Oh, you grew up in a conservative family and you turned liberal," it's like, that's called the way everything has always worked. I don't understand why you would expect a different outcome. And the thing is, how you think about the world matters, and that's mediated by how you see the world. And if you grew up in a wealthy family, you see the world differently. If you grew up in a middle class family, you see the world differently. If you grew up poor, you see the world differently. Now, to the extent that you can move up and down those socioeconomic classes, sure, you can move up and down, but not very much. And how much does your worldview change? And when you get to the top, we'll say from the bottom, what do you do with it? Maybe that's not good for you. Look at Kanye West. Maybe it's not good to move up and down the socioeconomic hierarchy. Maybe it drives you crazy. Maybe you can't fit in. And there's a great deal of evidence for that. And that's the problem. Anselman, what do conservatives conserve? Everything. And they drop it's not about conservation as such. It's about drawing lines and standing by those lines. So they conserve boundaries that they believe are better than other boundaries. Very important. That's what a conservative is. Don't those who call themselves that usually end up redrawing? Yes, because people who would call themselves conservatives are never conservatives. No conservative would publicly go, "I'm a conservative." That would never happen. This is the problem. You're just being fooled by a binary way of thinking about the world. Most people identify as moderates. That's because most people are moderates. You should not expect anything different, by the way. If you're expecting something different, I don't know what to tell you about the world you live in and nature. Most people are not conservatives, and most people are not lefties or liberals or whatever. Most people are not those things. I'm just sorry to tell you. And most people won't get YouTube channels, and most people won't speak up. Most people. Most people, when given an opportunity, will not talk. Period. That's most people. It's, in fact, the overwhelming majority, in fact. You got to remember, you're sampling outliers all the time. You know who's not sampling outliers all the time? No one. Everyone's always right. The difference is moderates will switch which outlier. Oh, this one doesn't work anymore. I'm gonna give up on Carl Benjamin and go listen to Connor Tomlinson. Please don't do either. Don't listen to either of them. My goodness, right? That's the problem. Is that conservatives aren't out there to be seen. They're busy working and building and creating and allowing other people to use their creations to better themselves, because that's the path to creating a better world. Not talking about things, not debates, not conversations, not arguments, and not interviews. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do any of those things ever. I'm saying that isn't going to move the needle the way you think it is. And that's a big problem. None of these commentators understand any of these things that I'm talking about for some weird reason, probably because they're in the middle of this. And the thing is, when you hear somebody talking about things like, "Oh, you're going to get thrown out of the conservative club," um, just ignore them. Just ignore them. And Carl Benjamin in particular, I really used to like Carl Benjamin a lot. I have so much of his merchandise from back in the day. He talks about these other people holding ideologies. Okay, maybe. What's the difference between what you're saying and an ideology, Carl? Well, there isn't one. He's not going to be able to point to one. He's actually been challenged on this before. That's why I say that. Like I've watched him. He can't do it. Can't do the trick, right? Because if you're not embodying the values that were imbued by Christendom and realized oddly most strongly outside of it in the United States, you're probably not pointing to anything at all. The odds of that just seem to be 100% for some weird reason. These people that talk about other people having ideologies, well, you better make sure they don't have an ideology. And how would they know? They're caught in the middle of all this. The thing is, Carl Benjamin's talking about, again, modifications to reality, hyper reality. This is Baudrillard stuff, apparently. And it just, reality, the best way to think about this, reality is just really big. Reality is so much bigger than you because it contains you, and therefore it's bigger than, I don't know why I have to talk like this, but I do. This drives me nuts. Reality is bigger than you. And so at any given time, you can't see all of it. Right. And so these hyper realities that Baudrillard talks about are just different perspectives. And that's it. And again, as I pointed out earlier, that's all that's going on in this conversation. That's all that's going on. Like, Piers has a different perspective on everything in the world. And Nick Fuentes has a different perspective on everything in the world. And their perspectives don't match mine at all. And I'm not in disagreement with Nick Fuentes because most of what he says is true and important. It's accurate and precise. How do you radicalize somebody? You ignore the things that they're talking about that correspond to reality. Go ahead. The way you don't radicalize people is by saying inflammatory things or getting to join militias. And none of that stuff radicalizes anyone. That may attract radical people, but they were radicalized by you ignoring them. And that's why, to Anselman's point, keep quiet and carry on. That's what conservatives do. They keep quiet and they carry on. Don't get caught up in these things. Bubbleviz, good to see you. Carl Benjamin switched his views to be aligned with Nick Fuentes. Carl's never switched his views on anything. Carl's just confused about what he believes. There's no switching views to Nick Fuentes' views. One of the downsides to Nick Fuentes is he doesn't have any solutions to any of this. And we could get into that. We could say, look, Mark, he said quite clearly, and I think Piers put this quote up, although I can't keep track of who put up what quotes and where they're from. But if we just put all the blacks in jail and get rid of all the Jews, everything would improve, right? And there was obviously a little bit of hyperbole and comedy being used there. Look, saying things that are at some level true when your opponent doesn't address them is how you radicalize that person. If I'm telling the truth and you ignore the truth that I'm telling, you're radicalizing me and everybody watching, because it's a cognitive disconnection, right? It's a little bit of cognitive dissonance. This person's bringing something to your attention and you're ignoring it. Why would you do that? It's a good question. Piers is ignoring it because he's never seen it and doesn't believe it exists. That's why he's ignoring it. Fair enough. What choice does he have? You can sit there, and Carl Benjamin did this a number of times, and say, look, the numbers are in. No one looks at the numbers. Of the people that look at the numbers, almost zero people are going to do anything about the numbers in terms of changing their mind. I'm sorry, but that has to be true because those numbers have not really changed very much over the decades. And everybody isn't a Fuentes believer. They're all ignoring him. Why? Because they're ignoring the numbers. Well, if they're ignoring the numbers and showing them more numbers that show the same thing is not going to change their mind ever. There's a technical reason for this. The technical reason is the following. When you're at the top, say you're Piers Morgan and you're at the high end of the socioeconomic class system, maybe he's also, I don't know where he was educated. He might be like in the Eton Club or something, right? Which would be worse, by the way. But when you look down and you see bad behavior, there are lots of reasons for that bad behavior. One of the reasons for that bad behavior is, and this is the discrepancy, this is the asymmetry. People who can pay attention to such things, because they do, are well aware, especially if they're in the media, of reporting. Okay. You can look at the numbers in the UK and go, the reason why all of these rapes are being reported as immigrant rapes is because the reporting system is flawed. And you can say, well, that's a ridiculous argument. No, no, that is the way those types of people think about things. I know you probably haven't been around them, but I actually have had conversations with them, many, many, many. They are not always aware of whether or not the numbers are real, but they are aware that these things happen. Piers of all people knows this because he's in a business that does this on a regular basis, right? So he may assume that the cops are playing games with these numbers because they're in on it, which is actually true, by the way. Now, do I think they're in on it to any significant extent that we should ignore the overwhelming reality of the immigrant problem in the United Kingdom? No, no. But people like Piers look at immigrants of similar socioeconomic class and they don't see a discrepancy in their behavior relative to their own. That is true. These things are not in conflict with one another. They're just different aspects of reality that different people have different access to. That's all that's happening, guys. That's it. And you can follow Academic Agent or Connor Tomlinson or Warren Smith or Carl Benjamin or whoever you want to follow. They're all suffering from this. They are in a bubble too. Their commentary is coming from a bubble. And the thing is, talking about Hitler and saying he's cool isn't the issue. And I'll tell you why. It's very simple technological sort of reality here. Everybody thought Hitler was cool in like 31, 32, 38. He was on the cover of Time magazine. Okay. Piers knows this, right? The fact that he can't make the connection is a different problem for sure. And it is a problem. Like, duh. Why did everybody buy into Hitler and anti Semitism? People in New York City allegedly couldn't get jobs if they were Jewish back in the 30s. Right. And that only changed after a certain point in the conflict. Everybody thought Hitler was cool back then. This is not a controversial take. And the problem is a military parade is still beautiful. Beauty won't save the world. And I hate to break it to you, Peterson's right. If you were in Nazi Germany, you would be a guard. You would not be some compassionate savior, and you would, or you would be a prisoner. That's what you would be. You would not be the guy standing up against the Nazi party. You just wouldn't. I'm sorry. And these commentators are using moral high ground to tell you about a conversation between two people they don't know, have never met, and all of their framing is actually incorrect. And more importantly, it doesn't give you participation. In other words, those commentators are contributing to the radicalization that they are very much trying to fight by giving you a way to understand things. Give somebody a way to understand things without giving them a way to, I don't know, participate in things. If you want a book about participation, I happen to have one. And in fact, I so actually have this book that, in fact, you can, if you wish, and of course, I think you should, buy a copy of my book. I'm just saying. So, the question is, where is my link to my book, which I thought I had in here? Oh, there it is. Yeah. Community is the key. If you want to know how to save the world, community is the key. If you want to know how to build a community, now's your chance. Buy the book, build a community, and see how it goes. And the workbook's coming soon. But look, when you like have a beef with somebody over what they can and cannot say, which is very much what Piers was doing, like you can't say you love Hitler or whatever. That's censorship. Now, look, I'm not against censorship at all. I'm on the other end of that. I'm like, no, more censorship now, please, because we can't let certain people talk. The issue is that the other people who claim to not want censorship but are actually doing censorship at the same time because they're sneaky, they just don't agree with who should be able to speak and what should be able to be said. That's my only beef with them. That's why I tell them, no, I agree. Let's do some censorship. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, if you need any evidence that you should buy the book, Joey here says, can confirm, should buy book. Now that it's available, you can. Joey already bought his copy because he's the best person that I know. You kind of have to understand these things in that context. Carl Benjamin, as much as I love him, is not going to build a community, at least not the type that's going to help knit the world together. Not saying what he's doing is bad or that he shouldn't be doing it. I'm fine with pretty much everything he's doing except the stupid commentary. Except his pontification about everybody else as an ideology, but I read philosophy, so I can tell you how this works, because Baudrillard, oh my goodness. And the thing is, the reason why you wouldn't do something like prosecute people committing real crimes is because you don't want those crimes to be true and real. Maybe you think that we are somehow not finding the real criminals, and the criminals we are finding are innocent, right? Or are not the worst criminals. Like we could be finding other criminals that aren't immigrants, and the poor immigrant, right? And so you don't want to believe it. And so of course you're going to prosecute the people that you want to be criminals in your worldview, in your fantasy worldview, right? But those are side effects. It's not intentional. It's not like I'm against all white people. It's actually not. It's that I think the white crime is undersampled by the police, who are complicit in some of it, maybe, right? Relative to the immigrant crime. And the only reason why people are reporting immigrant crime and the police are going after immigrant crime and people are prosecuting immigrant crime is because of their bigotry. That is not an illogical, irrational, or unreasonable stance. It's wrong, by the way. It's clearly wrong, okay? But I don't blame anybody using logic, reason, rationality for being okay with that, right? Like that's fine. That's fine. And that's part of the problem. Bruce, book acquired. Thank you, Bruce. It's good to see you, sir. We miss you on the Discord. Joey, ideologies create ridges. Carl keeps his brain smooth and free from ridges. Yeah, exactly. Their justification is always, well, my logic is better than your logic, and therefore, and the problem is logic doesn't solve any of these issues. Lots of things are logical and false, right? I hate to break it to everybody, but listen, Hitler's case for genocide was not illogical, irrational, or unreasonable. It was bad, wrong, and evil. It was unethical, immoral, and the worst possible answer, but it wasn't illogical or irrational or unreasonable. And that's why it worked. That's why it worked, because it worked. Did you not? I mean, this is the argument. It clearly worked. That's why he's the bad guy now. And that's the thing. These people want the fantasy of their world to be true. And so they cast entire groups as though they're interacting the way single people would interact. Oh, clearly this person is racist because they're accusing this immigrant of, trying to rape them. I was like, well, but immigrants are raping people all the time. Like, I don't understand. And of course they're more likely to do that. Of course they are. They're strangers. They don't have a connection to the place and the people. They're immigrants. And one of the weaknesses that Nick and pretty much everybody who argues this point has, which just blows my mind that they're all making exactly the same mistake, is that, well, Nick's an immigrant and therefore, like, they would have kicked your father out too if you were in charge. And Nick doesn't know how to counter this. The way to counter this is simple. What you do doesn't necessarily matter, but why you do it and how it's done matters a lot. And that's the issue. If you are not incentivized to move to a place, but you move to a place anyway, you're going to filter for a different type of person than if somebody says, hey, come here, we'll pay you money. It's just different incentive structure for people from the past coming into the UK or the US than there is now. And we've had many waves of immigration to the US, but they were all for very different reasons. So, for example, I grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts. Lowell, Massachusetts was 48% non-white when I was young. A long ass time ago, unfortunately. 48% not white. I grew up in the most diverse city in America. We had a bunch of Laotians there and Cambodians. Why Laotians and Cambodians? Vietnam War refugees. Why were they there? Political reasons. We were protecting the people that helped us during the war. Period. Songus, he's the guy who did that. Good guy too. Nice Greek gentleman. Also an immigrant, right? Who want hardworking immigrants, to help strengthen this country, because when, a couple hundred years ago, it was empty. But having people come in and give them tax money and spend $2 billion a year just in the state of Massachusetts on immigrants, that's a different person. You're filtering for a different type of person. And people make this argument all the time, like, well, they're Spanish. Of course they want, they want open borders. Listen, in particular, guys from like Mexico and South America that are here, if you actually ever talk to one, which I'm sure you haven't, right? But I have many, many times. I grew up in Lowell. They don't want their lazy cousin Eddie coming over here. For real. They left cousin Eddie behind for a reason. Yeah. Ask them. They'll tell you this. Right. Well, they're not for open borders. They're for, hey, I want to get in and close the door because those people that I left are nuts. That's why they left. It matters why you left. It matters why you're coming here. And it matters what happens when you get here. If you get here and you're on your own, kid, whatever you took in with you, you have to leverage that to make something out of it. That's a very different type of person than the person who comes here and gets immediate housing and food. Totally different person. This matters a lot. No one's making that argument because we're busy listening to freaking Carl Benjamin spin off into smooth space where he doesn't have to worry about ideologies because he's not trapped in one. Heaven forfend. Dude, you went to college and got indoctrinated like an NPC character. I hate to break it to you, but you used to be awesome. What happened? And you get weird side effects, right? Like Brett Weinstein talking about this. He's like, well, listen, you don't want to say we let this happen to Nick Fuentes. If I had been in charge, I would not have let this happen. Brett, this happened to you at Evergreen, kid. You didn't even see it coming. You still don't understand what happened at Evergreen. And you want to pretend like, had you been in charge in a position of these other people, mysterious other people, undefined, by the way, you wouldn't have let what happened to Nick happen to Nick? You don't even know what happened to Nick. But you wouldn't have let it happen. You're delusional, buddy. I just used to like Brett too. I used to listen to Brett all the time. And this is what happens when these people who get good at one particular thing or one particular issue start to branch out into other issues, just like Jordan Peterson going into politics with his ARC conference. Bad idea. It's not where you're strongest, buddy. You ain't got the skills. Carl Benjamin ain't got chops in philosophy, which is reprehensible anyway, unless you're talking about Plato and Aristotle and people before them. After that, it's garbage. This is the problem. The problem is these people are out doing things they're not good at because they were good at something else or they got lucky. Taleb talks a lot about this. Read all of Nassim Taleb's books. They're absolutely wonderful. And if you don't know, I often quote from this on Fridays on my live streams. Uh, I got to get a topic for tomorrow night's live stream. I don't have one. Um, Taleb talks about this whole thing where a lot of people just get lucky. And you'd be surprised how little, we'll say, accurate, precise, and correct information you need to do well. There's a story in at least one of his books, a guy who was trading green lumber and he thought the lumber was painted green, which makes me laugh because I know green lumber means it's not seasoned yet, right? It was freshly cut. That's why it's green, because it looks a little green when it's freshly cut. I know that because I've cut down trees before. A lot of people don't know that because they've never been outside. Grow a bean, cut down a tree. So the guy didn't know. He made millions and millions and millions of dollars trading in green lumber. Why? Because the pattern of trading a labeled commodity can be seen by somebody and taken advantage of. And knowing exactly how it all works is irrelevant, actually. I have lots of videos on why knowledge is a waste of your time, or at least the type of knowledge people are foisting on you, especially in schools. Let's see. Joey, Cesar Chavez thought undocumented immigrants were scabs and organized in informal border patrols called wet lines. Yes, yes. Bruce, the intellectuals know many things, but seem not to know the extent of their own ignorances. Yeah, well, that's that misquote that the intellectuals in particular love because they are nothing like what they say they are. Socrates did not say, I know nothing." He's basically what he said was, "I understand the limits of my knowledge. I know what I know and what I don't know." Right? I know not to talk about things I don't know about. Carl Benjamin is not in that class. Well, a lot of these people aren't. And they may have a successful YouTube channel, and I don't, and that's fine. I'm not trying to have a successful YouTube channel. I'm trying to help very specific types of people with very specific types of things. And to the extent that that seems to be working, I'm super happy, and it is working. And to the extent that maybe nobody can see the results or very few people see the results, I'm okay with that because I just need the results and I don't need to be getting credit for it or whatever. Um, Joey with the philosophical quote of the century, "I know, therefore I ain't." Socrates. Excellent. Or Socrates. I don't know which one. I don't know how he's pronouncing it. So people like Brett are not taking responsibility. They're talking about things that are so far out of the realm of their perspective or understanding or maybe even mental capability that they're creating a problem. They're not taking responsibility for the influence that they have and deploying it wisely on the things they're good at. Jordan Peterson is an excellent teacher. He should continue to teach and not get involved in politics. Period. It's that simple. Brett Weinstein is probably good at something, although I don't know what. But he should do that instead of what he's doing. Maybe he should just organize more trips to the jungle or whatever. It sounds like he might be good at that. Maybe he should do that. Maybe he shouldn't be on online. And they lost me during fake news virus scam with the 10 truths video. I lost it because 3 of those were not true. And I was like, all right, we're done here. And it's too bad because like I liked Brett before. Even when he was wrong about a bunch of things, he was still, saying better things than worse things, right? So speaking up against some of the anti-science that was happening. Um, I, I I I think people don't notice all the dumb statements going on. Like I think it was Carl Benjamin was saying like civilization liberates individuals. This is an unbelievably stupid thing to say. It's civilization is the result of individuals cooperating together, if you wanted to say that. Um, but the statement implies that people claiming, that there's someone running civilization creating a problem. It's like civilization is run by all the people in it, with the exception of 0 people. And so it doesn't make any sense. It's a contradictory frame. This is the sort of thing that This is the sort of thing that happens when people start trying to reason their way into their own perspective. They're trying to validate their own perspective. Maybe it was Brett that said this. Anyway, yeah, there was this whole thing about civilization can't liberate people in a way that destroys the system that protects them to be free. Like, well, then obviously what you're saying is wrong. And people miss that. They miss that these commentators are saying things that are obviously contradictory and wrong. And so maybe if you don't notice these things from Brett and from Carl and from Connor Tomlinson, maybe you just shouldn't engage with them because they're dangerous to you. They're going to indoctrinate you to enchant you into something that you don't understand. And that's the problem with this mode that we're in because one day you're following James Lindsay and then he blows up on woke right, to Brett Weinstein, which is even funnier. And of course, I have a video on that. I have a 4-part series on that whole conversation. And then the next day, you've got to follow Carl Benjamin because there's no one else or whatever, right? Is the person that most aligns with my personal. Okay. Picking people because they align with you is called confirmation bias. Don't do that. These commentators are always trying to fit these things into their worldview, into their perspective, the way they see the world. And they don't notice this about them. That's the issue. They don't notice that that's what they're doing. And fair enough, it's hard to notice. But we need to get to a point where we don't have, quote, free speech, whatever we redefine that to be, because when I was growing up, it wasn't defined anywhere near the way it's being defined now, by the way. That should be a hint. People were able to understand that there are consequences in the world and we need to manage them. What we should be training people to do is to have discernment, to Bruce's excellent point. And you at least need to discern the people you're listening to. Discernment is lacking. It is, Bruce. You at least need to be able to discern the people you're listening to in terms of, is this useful? Can I participate with it? Or do I need to not listen to this person anymore? I love me a good Joe Rogan podcast every once in a while, but a lot of Joe Rogan stuff is garbage. It's junk. And it's junk. Bruce, what are you doing? Are you reading my mind? It's junk because as Bruce says, more information isn't helping. And if you need sort of we'll say an enhanced way of understanding that, I have several videos on this. I have several videos on why information won't help. I just put one out, in fact. And I think if you really want to understand why we're in this morass of jumping from person to person and not getting it and not realizing that this is unhelpful and that you can't participate with it, you have to understand that certain things are happening in the world. Okay. One of them is that the myth of World War II is breaking down. That's sort of the near-term frame. It's not an excellent descriptive frame because it's really the end of materialism. And materialism is defined by me, at least, as believing that the material is the prime mover or primary motivator for something. Material is not, and that causes problems. The other thing that we're witnessing a lot of, which is where the Jordan Peterson phenomenon comes from, is the collapse of the ivory tower. The ivory tower was serving a purpose, and that purpose is no longer served because it has collapsed. And so it's worth finding out, why did it collapse? So of course I have a video on that as well. When you understand things, we'll say in the larger frame, you can start to realize that psyops, like democracy being good, should be well known by everybody to be a psyop. Why? Because Plato talked about this. And had these people who read Plato just mentioned this to anybody ever, this would be a huge upgrade to everybody everywhere. This is the problem. These commentators are not even doing the basic research about what they're talking about. And because of that, there's a bunch of lies that everyone's telling that we've bought into. And you need to like fight back from all of this stuff. You can't sit there and listen to these commentators. That's why I do my analysis videos. They're all very, very good. They're actually super time consuming, so I don't do a lot of them. They just take a lot out of me. Watching stupid people talk just devastates my brain because I'm trying to understand what the hell they're talking about, and it's super hard to do. It's super hard to do. And I I I think that the the problems that we cast onto the world, like Denise, hello Denise, immaterial, it doesn't matter, linguistically embedded. No, we changed the definition of matter. The language didn't change. The conception of matter is primary change. That's the materialism. If something doesn't matter, that's okay. Bruce Wilkie, Mark, trying to understand people is the core problem there. Yes, trying to understand stupid people, like because you're trying to track all their mistakes, which are just numerous, because they're built on bad axioms. Somebody has bad starting axioms, they're going to have bad conclusions. That doesn't mean they're not also going to have good conclusions. Good conclusions are kind of inevitable. But the fact that it's bad conclusions is lost on people. I didn't get the memo. Denise, if you think about what happened, the fact that something doesn't matter just means it's out of the realm of science and materialism can't help you. And that's okay, right? That means it's not even important in the frame of science, which means it's not important at all. All important things, even after medieval times, is not even a medieval thought problem. Were understood to be, we'll say, religious in nature, or supernatural, which is the correct scientific term uh, for things that are, we'll say, outside of nature. Uh, by the way, the things outside of nature have to be the things in that created or are containing nature itself. In other words, creation. It's the easiest way to think about it. We're stuck in creation denial, which is causing people to bounce from person to person to person as sense making apparatus in light of the fact that they weren't following leaders. The easiest way to understand is that the hierarchy is deep and tall, and the corruption is across the hierarchy. And that's causing the hierarchy to collapse because everybody's saying equality doctrine all the time. I am not equal to you. You are not equal to me. That is a good thing. That makes us different and allows us to understand that we're not the same person. Thank God for that. This is a plus. Equality is a minus. Equality destroys your sense making. Piers thinks that immigrants and native people are equal. Of course, he can't see the discrepancy in the crime ratings. They're just people. Why is this hard? He's stuck in an equality doctrine. The equality doctrine is false. If you want to change Piers's mind, you have to get him out of the equality doctrine. Arguing him on facts and figures isn't going to work. Those facts and figures, he can't discern them. Rape is rape. It doesn't matter who does it. I mean, to some extent, that's actually a correct frame. So you're approaching the problem all wrong because you have a poor problem definition. You're approaching the problem all wrong because you think you can make a difference. You're not going to change the minds of the elite. I'm not saying that can't be done and someone can't do it. I'm saying you're not going to do it. Unless you give people the understanding that they are stuck where they are in the hierarchy and they ain't going nowhere, and so they better figure out how to be the best they can be where they're at, nothing is going to get better, but everything will for sure get worse. The idea that you should be wrapped up in the war in Ukraine or in the whatever's happening in the Middle East or any of the number of things that are going on in the huge continent of Africa that no one ever talks about, this is destroying your life. You need to think locally and you need to act locally and you need to be part of a community. And if you don't know what that looks like, the book is there. I'll just pin the link on well, I won't pin the link because I can't. But I'll add the link to the description at some point when this is over. Buy the book, build a community, make it local, do it in person. Don't pay so much attention to these online people talking about things that are giving you, some sense of calm because now at least you have an explanation for what you saw and what did or didn't happen. And that's the problem. History, whatever. What's the difference between immigrant rape and a native rape? I mean, that depends on what you want to accomplish. Telos is the thing. Final cause matters, right? That's why on here, we often say, make final cause great again, because we need to make final cause great again. We need to start understanding the world in terms of final cause. The solution to the problems of the world is not a debate, turning the mind of Piers Morgan to the legitimate plight of Nick Fuentes, right? It's to be better because the world needs you. Be better because the world needs you. The world needs you, so be better. That's the answer. These other things are not answers. Be better. Build a community. Make the world better. Denise tells you to learn to make cheese. Absolutely. Anselman, think locally. Don't send your sons off to foreign wars. Well, I can't agree with don't send your sons off to foreign wars. Don't send anybody off to an unjust war, but fight in a just war. Don't be naive. I'm a pragmatist. War is a reality and it ain't going away. The question is, do you want to fight over whether or not war is going to come? Because war is going to come. That's a dumb fight. It's like the poor will always be with you. War will also always be with you. The question is, do you fight in a just war or not? You fight in a random war somewhere on the continent of Africa or in the jungles of South America or over in the Middle East or whatever. Fight the just war if you must fight a war, but avoid war otherwise. But don't think you can avoid war indefinitely. That's not going to happen. And they're all utopians. All these people are idealists. Carl Benjamin's an idealist. Piers Morgan is an idealist. Nick Fuentes is an idealist. He's got these nice solutions. Lock up all the black people and get rid of the Jews. Okay, dude. I guess that's your ideal world. I understand what he's saying. I think it's funny as hell, by the way. He's not wrong when he says, yeah, a lot of black people agree, right? What they agree with is lock up the bad actors because they're making the rest of us look bad. Everybody thinks that's true because that's true. Might be a hint. So, all right. Does anybody have any questions and whatnot before I shut this down? Because I actually have to go do things in real life at some point. Big there's a holiday party. I don't know if I'm going to make it to that, but there's a big event in town for me today, the group that I support. So I'm definitely going to be going to that. Yeah. And what else? What else? Look, I mean, this is the problem of these things is when you're looking at these commentators, when you're caught up trying to get, we'll say, reasonable explanations for things, you're going to get lost in these problems. You're going to get caught up in another drama that's going to blow up. And if you don't believe that these things blow up, or you think that you think somehow that the situation isn't the way I'm casting it. Look what happened with Charlie Kirk's death. All those people are fighting. I don't know why. I don't know what about. I don't understand any of it. You've got crazy conspiracy theories going on. You've got all sorts of things being revealed that aren't important. Oh, so and so is threatening to cut off funding, and so is embezzling money, and what these things are always happening all the time, everywhere, pretty much, with very few exceptions. That's why we hold up ideals in the world. It's not a lie to hold up an ideal. It's a hope for a potential, for a future, for a perfection that you want to attain. These people know full well, Anselman, to your point, that if you flood people with information, it'll look fishy. Do you know what else looks fishy when you flood people with information? Everything, everything's a mess. Bruce will be very upset to learn, of course, that we don't live in a perfect world. The more information you have about something, the more flaws you find in it. Period. End of statement. That's true of everything. All these things you think are like great and perfect, just go look into it more and it'll look fishy to you because everything is that way already. It's a miracle that anything holds together for any length of time at all. And we should be grateful for that. And tacky political theater of a memorial. Well, you're always going to get that. That's never going away. So I don't care because it's a universal. Bruce, people are falling prey to the same tabloid culture. Oh yeah, that's the word I was looking for earlier. Tabloid culture we have always had, right? And yet somehow they feel as though they're above it because they're in the realm of politics and human hybrids in the Inquirer. Right. It's not about Bat Boy or whatever in the Inquirer. And so they think, oh no, this is okay tabloid. It's like it's not. Tabloid's very attractive, and these are mostly middle class and upper middle class people, not realizing they're in the tabloid business and believing they're above the tabloid business, but they're in the tabloid business. And that's what happens when, in the case of Candace Owens, you take somebody who isn't of that class and you put them in that class. You drag the tabloid up. Don't drag the tabloid up. I'm not saying she shouldn't marry up or whatever, but girl needs some guardrails, and she doesn't have any. Ansman, roll out the pyrotechnics for the grieving. Yeah, well, maybe you need to. I mean, maybe it's not for the grieving. Maybe it's for the people who want to celebrate a life, which is important. Kierkegaard was scathing about following the daily papers. Well, Kierkegaard's an idiot, so I would tend to say Kierkegaard is wrong about everything. Bruce, absolutely, is rich man, poor man scenario to be unbothered. Yeah, exactly. Part of the problem is because we're mixing things, we're thinking, I can understand the mind of Piers Morgan. Okay, never seen the world the way Piers Morgan does. I know people at his level, or have known people at his level. Okay, I have talked to them. I have some understanding about how they see the world because they will tell you if you just listen. If you instead say, well, obviously the crime statistics are in, and so Piers knows what he's saying is false, then you're going to be wrong because Piers will never believe that he's false because it will never match his experience ever. I'm sorry. And even if he does believe you, his solution is going to be let them eat cake. The reason why Marie Antoinette said let them eat cake, which is not quite what she said, I get that, but also that is kind of what happened, is because she's got a bunch of people knocking at her door of her beautiful palace demanding bread. This is not a problem for Marie Antoinette. She has all kinds of breads. In fact, divine pastry breads. If they'll go away and stop threatening my palace, I'll just give them some of my bread because I have plenty. That's just two people talking different language from different perspectives. Those people weren't like, we're starving right now and all we need is bread and we'll leave you alone. But Marie Antoinette didn't know that. How could she? She doesn't know what it's like to have the cost of bread so high that you can't afford it. That's never been in her hyper reality. Oh, yeah, it's retarded. Don't listen to French people. Good Lord. French Canadians, of course, God's chosen folk. But French, no. The French are horrible. They're responsible for all kinds of bad everything. I think there's one good French philosopher who is a theologian and not a philosopher, but whatever. Philosophy loves to claim, or scientists love to claim theologians as philosophers. I don't know why. You have to understand that people have different perspectives on the world, that you have a different, unique perspective on the world. And the fact that you can find people in your perspective is not surprising, and it's not indicative of anything because it's true for everybody. Piers knows immigrants. They're just all wealthy ones. They're not running around raping in some poor town in England, obviously. They don't go to those towns any more than Piers does. They don't see those things any more than Piers does. They're not part of grooming gangs any more than Piers is. Piers doesn't realize he's making a mistake accusing Fuentes of being an incel because he doesn't understand what an incel is. He doesn't understand what the term means, and he doesn't understand how accusing somebody of that is not going to win points with anybody. He's actually losing two audiences there. He doesn't know that. He's a tabloid person, not even a journalist. That's what he is. He deals in reputation. That's what he deals with. A very simple way to explain his behavior and explain his quote loss in the debate or whatever. The interview did not go well for Piers, and he was frustrated because he knew he couldn't lose, which is true. The interview did not go poorly for Fuentes because he knew he couldn't lose, which is also true. There were no stakes. And you can be worried about Fuentes someday running for political office, and maybe you should be. I don't know. I don't actually particularly care. I don't know Fuentes. Maybe he'd make the best president ever or something. I've never even talked to the guy. I wouldn't be so arrogant as to presume. Sorry, I can't go there. I don't have an opinion on that because I don't have any information on that. And the more information you give me without me talking to him, the less I trust you. You're not changing my mind. You're changing my mind about you, whoever you are. You could be Carl Benjamin talking about Nick Fuentes. You're making me hate you, dude. Right? Because you're preaching about something that you don't have direct experience with. And I don't like preaching, and I don't like people telling me about things they don't have direct experience with. I'm very suspicious of it. Now, obviously, if a physicist starts telling me how atoms work, maybe I'm a little sympathetic to something like that. But also, right, I think, yeah, Denise, some people are mourning, but not everybody mourns. Irish funerals are a thing, and they drink and sing songs and make merry. I think this is the problem. If you're stuck in equality doctrine, you somehow think that the funeral of Charlie Kirk is some like seminal, group moment that draws us all to it's nothing like that. First of all, I didn't know who Charlie Kirk was really. I've heard him talk. I was never impressed. Not your guy. Okay. Moderate, struggling with where to draw boundaries. As usual, most moderates do. I get that. Also, not a martyr, not interesting, was not moving the needle, meant something very closely to the people who are in college and struggling with the same things he's struggling with. You've got to remember the reason why radicalizing Nick is a certainty at this point. And the thing is, of the Groypers, he's really mild. So you can sit there and look at his audience and go, oh my God, it's these huge. There's way more Groypers than that, guys. And they're way more extreme than Nick is. That's something that should concern your ass, not Nick Fuentes. The reason why Nick is popular and the reason why he's growing and the reason why he's maintained in an internet that is ever changing is because there's only one way to do that. You have to be discussing something truthful that matches the observation and or experience of an audience. An audience will not stay with you for very long if you're not discussing something that is within their observation. In other words, you're talking about something that they saw happen to someone they know, that they witnessed in some way, or their experience. That's why I get pissed off when people talk about the 2008 housing crisis. These people are all morons. They should shut up. They don't know what happened. It's simple fraud. It's actual simple fraud. I have the proof. I have the proof. And had they done any research and realized 60 Minutes did a whole special on a company that did nothing but create fraudulent documents for the banks to use in foreclosures, that's 2 instances of fraud, not one. That's using a fraud to cover up your original fraud. Because if you had the paperwork all along, you wouldn't need to create fraudulent paperwork. But if you had the paperwork all along and you probably had the mortgage, in which case, why did the thing collapse? It collapsed because they never had the mortgage. These are very logical ways of thinking about the world. You won't hear any of the commentators on 2008 housing crisis talking like that. In the same way, you won't hear commentators on Nick Fuentes talking about the issues that Nick is talking about that are real and proposing solutions. And to be fair, you shouldn't talk about problems if you can't propose a solution to them. But it is fair for people like Nick and Groypers to say, listen, you're spending money to house people who aren't from here and who aren't coming here for the same reasons as my forefathers did. And that is displacing me out of the housing market, because that may or may not be happening, but he's certainly right that when you have problems at home, you shouldn't be spending money on people coming in from outside and putting pressure, wage pressure, housing pressure, any kind of pressure on everybody else. You shouldn't do that. That is correct. That is definitely happening to some extent. We can argue about, was that the exact mechanism? I can tell you, for example, Boston, the housing prices just shot up one day ridiculously. This was long before the fake news virus scam, because the changes that were going on, I saw happen. That's why I got the hell out. I would have gotten out earlier, but I was trapped by a lawsuit about the 2008 housing crisis. 5-year lawsuit starting in 2011. Ridiculous. Those people that were driving up the housing in Boston, which is a very small city, beautiful city, very small, they were all foreigners. Now, granted, they were wealthy foreigners and they were doing investment. They were buying property in Boston for their children and things like that. I understand that. But the idea that foreigners aren't displacing housing prices is not crazy. It's true. It's easy to map. And we have lunatics who have gone off the rails, like Ben Shapiro, saying, oh, the story of America is you move to where there's opportunity, which is a ridiculous statement. That is not the story of America. It never was. It never has been. And it could not possibly ever be. Because in order to have something for other people to move into, you have to build something. You're building your family momentum effectively. And of course, I do, of course, have a video on momentum. If you need to understand that better, do I actually have the damn link to momentum? No, I don't. But I do have a video on momentum. That momentum is what builds a place or a city. It's what builds a family. It's what builds wealth over time. Saying it's okay to displace that wealth, that building, through immigration or through just moving people around for whatever reason, however you do that, is not good. You're proving the Groypers' point, and you're making their case stronger. Don't do that. I don't want the Groypers' case to be stronger. Could we just not do that? Could we show a little bit of awareness of what? And this is what happens when you have commentators commenting on every little thing and giving people frames. And then people are going, oh, I took this frame and that frame and that frame, and this is what they have in common. Therefore, this is the truth. No, that's just the most common mistake they're making, because they don't understand the world, and they're telling you they do because they honestly believe they do, because they're that arrogant. That's just arrogance. So I'm not going to tell you what's in the minds of Piers Morgan and Nick Fuentes, or their followers for that matter, unless I've had these conversations before and I can tell you about my conversations with people like that. And I don't talk to Groypers very often, so I don't know what's going on there. Don't listen to these commentators. Don't do it. You're just feeding the algo. And the more you hear about something, the more you believe it. If somebody says everything's kayfabe, the next thing you know, academic agent is going to start talking about an interview in terms of a wrestling match. And it's so dumb that the people listening to it will probably be losing IQ points left, right, and center. Their brains will shrink. Uh, so stupid. I was so shocked that anyone could be that dumb and serious on camera at the same time. I was like, what world am I living in? It's just death by 1,000 cuts. Pay attention to what's near you. Pay attention to what's local. If you want to make the world better, all you have to do, because it turns out you're in the world, is to be better yourself. That will make the world better, and the world needs to be better. Listen, I appreciate everyone's engagement. I hope you found this helpful. If there's something you want to see, comment below. Maybe I can accommodate. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern time will be my pirate live stream. I don't have a topic, which I really need, but I don't know. I do have lists of topics, so I might just grab one off my live stream list. I probably won't be talking about this anymore because I am tired of talking about this. And although I've done hours and hours and hours of research, and thankfully the AI prompts and stuff that I have help. I was using Mistral, by the way, and a tool called Glasp, and I have a custom thing in there. It's very handy. If you haven't seen Glasp and used it with Mistral, which is pretty much free, I can recommend that. Claude is probably as good, or if not better. I didn't want to use my Claude credits on that because I'm using it for other things. But look, take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Think local. Buy the hell out of my book, because yeah, that's like my only form of income at the moment. So I'm pretty much going to die in poverty for sure. And be better. That's all I ask. And hopefully I'll see you for a pirate live stream tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Good luck.